They ask me sometimes why I walk the way I do. Sideways almost, left shoulder dipped, right foot leading, like I'm always about to slip around a corner that isn't there. I tell them it's the knee. The knee's a good enough answer. It shuts down the follow-up questions and lets me finish my drink in peace. The truth is longer than a knee. The truth takes a while to say and even longer to believe, and most people don't have the patience for either. So I let them think it's the knee and I drink slow and I remember the pressure, the real pressure, the kind that doesn't come from above or below, but from all directions at once. And I think about Liz and Mari and what it costs to become something the universe didn't plan for you to be. I was a combat engineer with the 14th Substrate Division, which sounds more impressive than it was. We were the people they sent into the holes first, not the fighters, the fixers. When a habitat module blew a seal at 300 meters depth, we went in. When a transit tunnel sheared its anchor bolts and was drifting loose in the current with 40 colonists still inside, we went in. When something the Cecil built started growing up through the substrate of Platform 9, and nobody could figure out what it was or how fast it was moving, they sent us in, and they told us to figure it out, and then they stopped answering our comms. That last one, that's the one we're talking about. My name is Pell. Most people call me P1 because on Platform 11 I was the first engineer certified for pressure work below 400 meters. It's a designation, not a nickname, but it stuck the way those things do. I was 31 years old when we dropped into the shaft under Platform 9. I've been told I look considerably older than that now. I believe it. The world is called Marin's Reach, which is a colonist name for an astronomical designation 16 characters long. The original survey team named it after their expedition commander, a woman named Marin Solis who spent 8 years in cold sleep getting there and died of a burst vessel in her temporal lobe 40 minutes after arrival, never having seen the water. I think about that sometimes. The cost of travel, the cost of arrival. The way the universe doesn't care about the distance you covered to get here. Marin's Reach is an ocean world, not metaphorically, not the way people back home call Earth an ocean world because 70% of its surface is water. I mean the planet is water, top to bottom, a sphere of layered seas going down 12 kilometers at the median point, tidally locked to its star, so one face burns in perpetual noon and the other freezes in perpetual dark. And we colonized the Terminator Zone, the ring around the middle where the temperature was livable, where the currents rose from the deep and created something close to weather. We built platforms on the seamounts. Habitats bolted to the rock 40, 60, 80, 300 meters down. We called it colonization. The Cecil called it something else. We never learned their word for it because they don't use words. The first survey teams encountered them and assumed they were geological. You can't blame those teams. The Cecil, when they're still, look like rock. Wide, low, flattened against the substrate, their carapace the same gray-brown as the volcanic basalt they prefer. 4 pairs of lateral appendages folded tight against the body. A single pair of manipulators, denser, articulated differently, tucked under the leading edge. From above, in the green murk of the mid-depth zone, a Cecil at rest looks like a particularly symmetrical boulder. They are not boulders. We learned that in the usual way, expensively, with fire and the loss of good people, and then with the dawning horror that fire didn't work well at 300 meters underwater. The Cecil are colonial organisms. Each individual you see is not a single creature but a community, a cluster of semi-autonomous biological units that share a nervous system, a metabolism, and something that functions like intention. They are old, older than our civilization by a factor we were not comfortable calculating. They have been on Marin's Reach for so long that the seamounts we built our platforms on were shaped in part by their activity. We built on their garden. We didn't know. That's not an excuse. It's just a fact, and facts don't care whether you're innocent or not. What made them terrifying? What made them genuinely, specifically alien in a way that nothing I had trained for had prepared me for, was what happened to the things they killed. They don't waste. That's the cleanest way to say it. A Cecil that defeats an organism doesn't discard it. It incorporates it. The biology is complex and I only understand the rough shape of it, but the short version is this. The Cecil can break down organic material at the molecular level and reassemble it according to their own template. What they do to the things they kill is something that biologists, when they're being clinical, call convergent remodeling. What the soldiers called it was worse. The Cecil take what they defeat and reshape it over time into something that looks like them. Wide, low, flattened, armored, they carcinize it. That word came from an old Earth biology concept. The way evolution over millions of years would independently arrive at the crab body plan again and again across unrelated species, because the crab body plan is so effective that nature keeps reinventing it from scratch. The Cecil had taken that principle and weaponized it. What evolution did in millions of years, they did in days. Whatever you were before, you became part of the shape they preferred. When we found the first human remains that had gone through the process, the medical team's report ran 47 pages, and the lead doctor requested immediate reassignment to a posting with no ocean access. The report used the word remodeled throughout. It used integration and absorption and substrate incorporation. It never used the word body, even once. That omission told you everything you needed to know about what the 47 pages actually described. I had read that report twice before they sent us into the shaft under Platform 9. The shaft was a maintenance access point, a 2-meter wide vertical bore through the seamount rock, used for running environmental cables and pressure equalizers between the platform surface and the deep anchor points. Something had come up through it. Not something physical, not yet. Whatever was growing in the rock had not broken through the surface, but the sensors in the shaft were reading biological signatures, organic chemistry, warmth, and the slow, rhythmic pressure differentials that the biologists, when they described sessile respiration, compared to breathing. Something large was breathing in the rock beneath Platform 9. There were 4 of us, me as lead engineer, Liz Coria, our acoustic sensor specialist who had come to the substrate division from a music background. She'd been a composer before the colony ran out of funding for anything that wasn't essential, and she'd retrained because she said the 2 jobs had more in common than people thought. Reading a sound, she told me once, is reading intention. You learn the structure of a thing by how it moves air, or water, or rock. She could pull more information out of a sonar return than anyone I'd ever worked with. Mari Vasconcellos was our structural engineer, the one who looked at a habitat module's load ratings and told you what it could actually take before the numbers on paper turned into catastrophic failure in practice. Mari had been trying to leave the division for 6 months. She had a transfer request in for the agricultural platforms on the Dayside Terminator, where the bioluminescent kelp farms ran, and the worst thing that happened was a pump failure. Her request had been approved. Her departure date was 11 days away. She told us this on the way down, not as a complaint, but in the flat tone of someone who has done the math and is aware that math is not the only variable. The 4th member of our team was a man named Gale, a junior engineer 18 months out of training, who asked good questions and kept his equipment clean, and had not yet developed the particular flavor of fatalism that the rest of us carried like a second piece of kit. I liked Gale. He reminded me of the person I'd been before I understood what the Cecil were actually doing to this planet. That person is gone now. I try not to grieve him too hard. We went down the shaft in single file, Liz first with the sensor array, me behind her, then Mari, then Gale watching the rear. The shaft was lit by our helmet lamps, the walls slick with the mineral seepage that was constant at this depth. The water pressure outside the rock above us already significant enough that you felt it as a weight across your sinuses. The dive suits handled the pressure directly. They were rated for 450, and we were only at 310, but your body knows what it knows. And what mine knew was that I was descending into rock in a wet shaft under an alien ocean, and the thing at the bottom was alive. Liz's first words, maybe 20 meters down, were quiet and certain. It's not moving. Define not moving, I said. Biologics are stable, respiration rate constant, no lateral displacement. Whatever it is, it's just sitting. Cecil would sit, Mari said from behind me. Cecil would sit, Liz agreed. We kept descending. The shaft narrowed slightly at a joint in the rock 40 meters down, where a seismic event years ago had shifted 2 geological plates, and the engineers who built the shaft had compensated with a steel insert that had since partially corroded. I wedged through it carefully, conscious of the suit, and dropped into the wider bore below. Liz was already 10 meters ahead, her sensor array sweeping slow arcs. I'm getting structure, she said. Not just biologics, there's a physical mass in the rock. It's not filling the shaft, it's parallel to it, running alongside. How big? A pause, the sound of her adjusting the array calibration. Big. That word in Liz's mouth carried weight. Liz did not overstate. When she said big, she meant a size that her instruments required a second pass to confirm because the number seemed wrong. I thought about the 47-page report. I thought about what a sessile organism large enough for Liz to call it big would look like up close, and then I stopped thinking about it because I needed to be functional. We document and we extract, I said. We don't engage. We are here to pull sensor data and get out. Nobody does anything that isn't documentation. Understood? 3 voices confirmed. We kept going down. The shaft ended at a pressure lock, a heavy steel door at the base that connected to the anchor maintenance tunnel, a horizontal passage running along the base of the seamount. The lock's status panel showed green. Pressure equalized. I turned the wheel, broke the seal, and swung the door open into a tunnel that smelled wrong. You can't smell much through a dive helmet with a closed respiratory system, but the smell came through anyway, not as a scent but as a presence, a thickness in the recycled air that the suit's sensors parsed into a chemical signature and displayed on my helmet's secondary screen. Organic compounds, complex ones, the kind of molecular signature associated with active biological processes. The tunnel ahead was full of something living's exhalations. We moved forward. The helmet lamps cut the dark in white cones. The tunnel walls, which should have been bare volcanic rock with steel reinforcement at the joints, were not bare. What covered them was the color of old bone and the texture of dried kelp, thin, flat, layered sheets of material that had grown against the rock in overlapping plates. Each plate was perhaps half a meter across. They overlapped like scales, or like armor. Is that, Gale started. Don't touch it, I said. I wasn't going to touch it. Good, keep not touching it. Liz was recording everything, her sensor array running continuous sweeps. The plates are metabolically active, she said, her voice steady and professional in the way that means someone is working very hard to keep their voice steady and professional. Low level, they're processing something. I'm reading trace mineral absorption, iron, calcium, silica. It's eating the rock. Or building, Mari said. We all looked at her. If it's pulling minerals, it might be building structure, reinforcing. The sessile build before they move. They fortify a position, then expand. She paused. This has been here long enough to do significant construction. How long is significant? I asked. For a mass this large, she checked her instruments, ran a calculation. Given the mineral density of the plates, months, maybe a year. We had been on Platform 9 for 3 years. The sessile had been building in the rock beneath it for most of that time, and none of our sensors had flagged it because none of our sensors were calibrated for something that grew this slowly. Something patient enough that a year of preparation wasn't preparation, it was a prelude. I keyed my comm. Platform 9 Command, this is Engineer Pell. We have confirmed biological presence in the anchor maintenance tunnel. Sessile-type growth, extensive, recommend immediate platform evacuation and static, not broken signal, full static, the kind that means something is blocking the transmission. I checked the suit's comm diagnostics. The suit was transmitting fine. The signal was being absorbed. The plates, Liz said. She had made the connection before I said it. They're dense enough to scatter the comm band. We're in a Faraday cage made of alien armor. Can we boost? Gale asked. Not from in here. I looked back at the pressure lock. One of us goes back up the shaft, gets above the mass, re-establishes comms. The rest hold position and continue documentation. Mari said, I'll go. Gale goes, I said. I need your structural assessment. Gale nodded, already turning. I'll be quick. He was quick. He was also the last one of us I ever saw move normally through an open doorway, the way a human being moves, upright, purposeful, like the space belongs to them. I remember watching him go. I remember thinking that he moved like someone who had not yet stopped believing that the world was basically navigable. I was glad he still believed that. I hoped it lasted. Then the mass moved. Not violently. That's what I want to say first, because when people imagine alien attack, they imagine violence, sudden, explosive, the shock of impact. The Cecil did not attack like that. The Cecil moved like pressure, like the tide coming in, like the slow, inevitable accumulation of water against a hull that has one small crack, and then a slightly larger one, and then is no longer a hull. The plates on the wall nearest me flexed. Not much. A centimeter of movement, maybe two. But they were rigid mineral-reinforced structures, and they flexed. And the sound it made, Liz described it later as a chord, the low harmonic frequencies of a dozen plate structures resonating together, was not loud, but it was absolute. It filled the tunnel and filled my chest and filled the part of my mind that understands, without argument or analysis, that something very large has noticed you. Back, I said, both of you back to the lock. We moved. The plates moved with us, not tracking us exactly, but expanding, the overlapping layers separating slightly and then resealing in configurations that I recognized, from the briefing slides I had studied, as the Cecil equivalent of alertness. Like a cat's ears rotating, like eyes opening. We made it to the pressure lock. I grabbed the door. The mechanism turned. The door swung. Something came through the wall. Not through a crack. Through the wall itself, the rock parting along some fracture line the Cecil had prepared over months of patient mineral work. And what came through was a manipulator. One of the heavy articulated limbs from the leading edge of a Cecil body. And at this scale, in this narrow tunnel, it was as wide as my torso and dense as forged steel, and it moved with the deliberateness of something that has never needed to hurry. It hit Liz, not a strike, an interception. It closed around her sensor array and her right arm in a single motion and stopped, holding. Not crushing, holding. And Liz didn't scream. She made one short sound, involuntary, and then she said, P1, get Mari out. I'm not. Get Mari out. I'll keep it occupied. It's not trying to crush, it's sampling. It samples before it pulls. I have maybe 2 minutes. She turned her head and looked at me, and in the visor of her helmet I could see her face, and she was not crying. She was computing. She was reading the thing that had her arm the way she read every signal, looking for structure, for intention, for the shape of the thing beneath the behavior. 2 minutes, she said. Use them. I used them. Mari and I went through the lock and up the shaft, and I will not describe the climb, except to say that it is a different thing to climb upward in a vertical shaft with your hands and your feet and your whole body, while the tunnel behind you is producing sounds you cannot catalog, and the person you left behind is someone you will spend the rest of your life thinking about. I will not describe it, but I will tell you that I made it and Mari made it. And when we broke the surface of the shaft and tumbled onto the substrate floor of Platform 9's lower maintenance level, Gale was there, and his face told me that he had already heard the sounds from below and already guessed, and the guess had aged him. Comms are up, he said. I called it in. They're evacuating the platform. How long? 20 minutes for full evac. The command staff wants to know if you can re-enter the shaft and... No, I said. He closed his mouth. No, I said again more quietly. It's occupied. We waited. The platform shook once 20 meters below us in a way that had nothing to do with current or seismic activity. Then it was still. They evacuated Platform 9 in 18 minutes, which is a record that still stands in the Substrate Division's operational logs. 712 people. They left behind everything they couldn't carry, and some things they could have carried but chose not to. Because when the floor is moving, you make decisions about what matters, and you don't always make the decisions you expected to make. I know a woman who left her wedding ring, left it on the counter of the galley where she'd been eating breakfast, and carried instead her daughter's drawing of a fish, folded 4 times and stuffed in her breast pocket. She told me later she wasn't sure why. I think she knew exactly why. Liz was not among the 712. Command pulled us back to Platform 11, which was the division's operational hub at that depth, larger, older, better armored, and positioned on a different seamount 2 kilometers from 9. I filed my report. I answered questions. I drank bad coffee from the galley dispenser and sat in the debrief room while officers who had not been in the tunnel asked me to describe exactly what I had observed. And I described it exactly. And their faces did the thing that faces do when the information they're receiving is worse than the information they had prepared for. The military response was significant. I won't go through it in detail because it is not the part of the story that matters and because I did not, in fact, witness most of it. What I can tell you is the outcome. Platform 9 could not be retaken. The Cecil mass beneath it, which was eventually mapped from safe distance, using long-range acoustic imaging, was larger than anyone had estimated from my team's observation. It was not just under Platform 9. It was under an area of seamount roughly 3 kilometers in diameter, at depths ranging from 200 to 800 meters, and it was connected. Not one organism, a network. The biologists added a new term to their reports, colonial integration at scale. What they meant was that this was not a single Cecil or even a community of Cecil. This was a coordinated organism the size of a small city, and it had been watching us for a year, and its patience was not the patience of a predator waiting to strike. It was the patience of something deciding, evaluating. Something that had faced many things before us and had developed a philosophy, however alien, about what those things were worth. It decided we were worth incorporating. Over the following weeks, 3 more platforms were compromised. Not collapsed. The Cecil did not destroy infrastructure the way a conventional enemy would. They grew through it. Platforms 7 and 12 were evacuated when sensors detected biological incursion in the substrate. Platform 3 was not evacuated in time, and what happened there is in the classified files that I do not have access to. But the people who do have access all have the same expression when the subject comes up, and that expression is enough. The military tried many things. I was present for some of them. Directed acoustic weapons were effective at disrupting the surface expressions of the Cecil network. The plates, the manipulators, the exposed biological material. But the network itself was in the rock, shielded by meters of basalt, and acoustic energy disperses through stone. Chemical approaches were constrained by the fact that we were operating in a closed ocean ecosystem, and the chemicals that affected Cecil biology affected other biology as well, including ours. High-pressure water cutting was tried and abandoned after it became clear that the Cecil were using the disrupted rock as additional mineral substrate, growing faster in disturbed areas than in stable ones. They tried thermal, directed heat applied to the substrate through conductive bore rods that we drilled into the seamount at calculated intercept angles. The Cecil network responded to thermal disruption by relocating its growth fronts, pulling back from the heated zone as if the rock itself had become uncomfortable, then resuming expansion from a flanking position. It took the network 3 days to adapt to a tactic we had spent 6 weeks designing. 3 days. They tried isolation, cutting the power to Platform 9 entirely, sealing the substrate-level access points with high-density composite foam, letting the platform go dark and cold in the hope that, without the heat signature of human occupation, the Cecil would reassess the site as not worth holding. The platform sat dark for 9 days. On the 10th day, the sensors on the adjacent substrate detected new growth fronts pushing out from the 9 seamount in 2 new directions, as though the network was using the cessation of activity as an opportunity to extend while our attention was occupied with the waiting. The military commander at Platform 11 was a woman named Colonel Vasquez, who had spent 20 years in conventional conflict on 3 different worlds and had never faced anything she could not eventually wear down by attrition. She did not say this publicly. She was too experienced to make that kind of statement where it could be quoted. But you could see it in how she allocated resources, always weighted toward engagement, toward action, toward the next approach rather than the assessment of why the last approach had failed. She was not wrong to try. She was not foolish. She was applying everything she knew, and what she knew was not adequate to the situation, and this was not her fault, and it was costing us anyway. I attended her briefings when engineers were required to attend, which was frequently because every tactical approach had engineering implications. I sat in the back and I listened, and I watched her staff move markers on the holographic substrate map, and I thought about the Cecil and what it was actually doing. Because here was the thing none of the briefings addressed directly, though the biologists' reports kept circling it. The Cecil was not trying to destroy us. Not one human being on Marin's Reach had died from a direct Cecil attack. The 3 from Platform 3 and the 9 from other platforms who were missing, who were incorporated, had encountered the network in conditions of close proximity and had been taken in what the reports called integration events, but none of those events had been aggressive in the conventional sense. The Cecil had not hunted. It had not breached our platforms and come for us in our bunks. It had not cut our power or fouled our watcher, or done any of the things an enemy would do to break our ability to function. It had grown, slowly, steadily, with the patience of something that did not have a concept of urgency. It had grown toward us because growth was what it did, and we were in the direction it was growing, and if we happened to be in the rock it was integrating, then we became part of the rock it was integrating, and this was not hostility in any sense the Cecil appeared to recognize. The biologist put it this way in one of her reports: the Cecil network does not appear to distinguish between organic and inorganic substrate at the level of basic growth motivation. It incorporates. It does not select, in any tactical sense, what it incorporates. It simply incorporates what it encounters. She paused in her briefing presentation and chose her next words carefully, aware of the colonel's expression. What this means operationally is that we may be approaching this situation through the wrong frame. We are treating the Cecil as an adversary. It may not have a concept of adversary. Then what does it have a concept of? The colonel asked. At this point in our understanding, substrate, self, growth, and something we haven't categorized yet that seems to be triggered specifically by contact with us, which is different. Different how? The network behaves differently around us than it behaves around any other material it has encountered. The growth rate changes. The direction changes. It's not faster aggression, it's slower, more deliberate, as if it's... She stopped. As if it's what? The colonel said. The biologist chose the word carefully, considering. Nothing worked, not immediately, not decisively. The Cecil were not defeated. They were patient. They had faced things before us, and they had incorporated those things, and they had grown, and they had centuries, and we had months of food stores and a resupply ship that was 14 months away. I spent those weeks doing what engineers do, not fighting, but maintaining. Keeping Platform 11 systems functional, running checks on the substrate sensors that we had redesigned after Platform 9 to detect the specific biological signatures of Cecil growth at much lower concentrations, patching seals, replacing corroded fasteners. The work of hands is not glamorous, but it is honest, and during those weeks I needed honesty from somewhere because I was not getting it from anywhere else. Mari found me one evening in the pressure suit bay, recalibrating a depth gauge that didn't technically need recalibration. She sat down on the equipment bench and watched me work for a while without saying anything, which was one of her qualities. She could be present without demanding that you respond to the presence. "My transfer request is still active," she said eventually. "I know. They're not approving it. I know. Because there's nowhere to transfer to that isn't also at risk." I set down the depth gauge. "They've modeled the network's growth rate. Best case, it reaches platform 11 seamount in 4 months. Worst case, 2. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. Liz would have had something to say about that, some observation about the frequency of bad news. Liz had a lot of observations. "Yeah," a longer silence. "I think about her a lot, about what she said. 2 minutes, use them." Mari looked at her hands. She was calculating P1, right up until the end, reading the thing that had her. What was she looking for? "I don't know. I think she was looking for the pattern, the way she always looked for the pattern. What is this thing actually doing? What does it actually want?" She paused. "And I think I might be wrong, but I think she found something, because she said 2 minutes like she knew, not hoped, knew." I had thought about this too. In the debrief, I had noted it as an estimate, Liz estimating how long the Cecil's sampling behavior would occupy it before it attempted to pull her into the mass. But Mari was right that Liz's certainties were specific, and she had been certain. "What do you think she found?" I asked. "I think the Cecil isn't interested in killing us," Mari said. "I think it never was. I think it's interested in us the way it's interested in everything it encounters, as material, as something to evaluate and potentially incorporate. And I think the reason it hasn't done to us what it did to the other platforms all at once is because we keep doing something it can't model." "What's that?" "Changing," she said. "We keep changing what we do. Every time the military tries something new, every time we adjust the sensors, every time we reconfigure the habitat layout, we're not predictable. And the Cecil, as far as we can tell, runs on a model of the things it encounters. It's been building that model for a year, and we keep breaking it." I thought about carcinization, about how evolution arrives at the crab body plan because the crab body plan is optimal, because under certain conditions of pressure and predation and resource competition, a wide, low, armored form with folded appendages and a hardened carapace is simply the shape that works best. The Cecil had taken that principle and made it into a weapon. Everything it faced, it evaluated, and if the evaluation was favorable, it incorporated the thing into its preferred shape. But what happened when the thing it was evaluating kept changing shape? "It can't incorporate something it can't model," I said slowly. "That's what I think," Mari said. "But that's not a weapon, that's just resistance, buying time." "It's the start of something." She stood up. "Liz bought us 2 minutes, maybe she was telling us something bigger, use them." I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in my bunk and I thought about shape, about what it means to choose the form you take instead of having it imposed on you, about what Marin Solis would have made of this ocean world if she had lived to see it, if she had spent those 8 years in cold sleep and arrived and breathed the air and looked at the water and lived long enough to understand what was underneath it. Would she have seen the Cecil as a threat, as a feature of the landscape, as something to study, something to negotiate with, something to become? I got up at 300 and went to the engineering bay and started drawing. There is a particular quality to the engineering bay at 300 that I have always found clarifying. The shift crew is minimal, 1 systems monitor, 1 pressure tech on rotating watch, sometimes a junior engineer catching up on maintenance logs. The lights run at half power. The equipment hums at its normal pitch, indifferent to the hour. When you sit down at a drafting station at that hour and start working, there is no committee. There is no colonel and no biologist and no mission parameters approved by 3 levels of command. There is the problem and there is you, And there is the question of whether you can see the shape of the solution before exhaustion blurs your eyes. I drew for 4 hours the first night. I erased most of it. The concept I was reaching for kept sliding away from the language of engineering. It kept wanting to be something else, something closer to what Liz would have called it, and I kept having to translate it back into terms that a sensor array could actually instantiate. What I was trying to build was a system that listened the way Liz listened. Not for a specific signal, not for a predefined signature, but for the relationship between signals, for what changed, for what the change said about what was happening beneath the change. I went back to my bunk at 700 and slept 3 hours and went back to the bay. What I eventually drew was not a weapon. I want to be clear about that. It was a modification, a reconfiguration of the sensor array system we used for substrate monitoring. The standard system listened for biological signatures at fixed calibration points. What I was designing listened differently, not for specific signatures but for change, for the delta, for the difference between what was there yesterday and what was there today, no matter how small. A system that tracked not presence but becoming. It took me 11 days to build, with Mari's help and Gail's fabrication work, and the grudging assistance of Platform 11's chief systems officer, who thought I was wasting resources but signed off because he was running out of better ideas. On the 12th day we deployed it, and on the 13th day we had data, and the data was not what I expected. The Cecil network was not advancing uniformly. It was not moving toward Platform 11 in the even front that our previous modeling had predicted. It was changing. Different regions of the network were changing at different rates, in different directions. The main mass under Platform 9's seamount was stable, but the edges of the network, the outermost growth fronts, were doing something the biologists had never observed in any previous Cecil behavior. They were retracting. Not dying, not being destroyed, pulling back, folding inward, reabsorbing peripheral growth into the central mass in a pattern that looked, if you wanted to use a word that might be overreaching but was the closest available, deliberate. The biologist we showed it to sat with the data for 4 hours before she spoke. Then she said, "It's consolidating." "Before in advance?" I asked. "Maybe," or she paused, "or it's reconsidering." "Can it reconsider?" "We don't know what it can do. We've been assuming it's a threat because it grows toward us and incorporates what it encounters. But we've never actually—" She stopped again, and I watched her reach the same place Mari had reached, the same place I had been circling for 11 days. "We've never communicated with it." "It doesn't communicate." "It communicates constantly. It communicates through growth, through pressure differentials, through the acoustic signature of its respiration. We've been studying that signature for months, and we've been reading it as biology, as autonomic process. But what if," she looked at the data again, "what if it's language?" Liz, who had said that reading a sound is reading intention. Liz, who had studied the thing that was holding her and not screamed and not fought but measured. Liz, who had told us we had 2 minutes with the certainty of someone who had asked a question and received an answer. What had the Cecil said to her in those 2 minutes? The acoustic data from the tunnel, from Liz's sensor array, which had been recording until the moment of signal loss, had been in the mission files since the day of the incident. Nobody had analyzed it as language. It was logged as ambient biological noise, cross-referenced against known Cecil acoustic signatures, and filed. I pulled it. I gave it to the biologist. I gave it to the 2 acoustic specialists on Platform 11 who were not Liz but were competent and had the time. And then I went back to the engineering bay, and I built another thing, a pressure differential modulator, which is a device for generating controlled variations in water pressure across a defined area, which is in turn a way of making sound underwater that is not conventional acoustic signal but structured oscillation, which is closer to the way the Cecil made sound than anything our technology had previously produced. I built it in 6 days, Mari told me I was not sleeping enough. She was right. On the 20th day after the data anomaly, the retraction, I took the modulator down to the substrate level of platform 11, to a maintenance corridor that ran along the outside of the platform's lower hull, and I listened to the Cecil. Not metaphorically. I sat with the data the acoustic team had prepared, their best interpretation of the structures in Liz's final recording, broken into repeating units, mapped against the pressure differentials of the network's respiration, and I listened. And I learned two things. The first thing, Liz was right. It was language, or something close enough to language that the distinction might not matter. The Cecil had not been holding her arm and sampling her biology in silence. It had been talking to her. In a medium she understood sound, structure, pattern, and she had listened, and she had understood enough to say 2 minutes with certainty, and what she had understood was this. The Cecil was asking what we were. Not as a threat assessment, not as prey evaluation, as a genuine inquiry in the only vocabulary available to something that has existed for millennia at the bottom of an ocean, to a species it had never encountered before. What are you? The second thing I learned was that the question was still open. The retraction in the network's edge growth was not consolidation for assault. It was the posture of something waiting for an answer. I pressed the modulator against the hull, and I answered. I won't pretend I knew what I was saying in any precise sense. I had 11 days of acoustic pattern analysis and a best-guess interpretation of the structures Liz had identified, and I had what felt like, I can only call it intuition, the kind of intuition you develop when you have been working with pressure and depth for long enough that your body understands things your mind hasn't formalized. I generated a response, structured oscillation. Pressure differentials in the frequency range the Cecil used. I repeated it 3 times, the way you repeat a phrase to someone who might not have heard it, and then I sat back and I waited. The hull vibrated. Not a stress vibration, not thermal expansion or current pressure. A low, complex, multi-frequency vibration that my instruments recorded, and that the acoustic team spent 3 days analyzing, and that the biologist, when she read the analysis, described as reciprocal inquiry. The Cecil had asked its question back. What are you? I have thought about this moment many times in the years since. What I was doing was not heroic. It was not strategic. Command did not authorize it, and when they found out, the response was energetic. There were hearings. There were strong words about operating outside sanctioned parameters. There was a formal reprimand in my file that is still there, I presume, though I have not checked. What I was doing was the thing that the situation required, which was not fighting the thing in the rock and not retreating from the thing in the rock and not trying to kill the thing in the rock, but answering it, because it had asked. The dialogue, if you can call it that, and I do call it that, because what else do you call 2 parties exchanging structured information about themselves, took 11 weeks. The acoustic team expanded to include linguists from the colony's academic contingent. We brought in the biologist full-time. We brought in a mathematician who specialized in pattern recognition, and a philosopher who specialized in non-human cognition, and a woman who had spent 40 years before the colony as a professional musician, and who listened to the Cecil recordings and said, on her 3rd day of listening, "It's asking how you make decisions." "How do you know?" I asked. "Because it's asking about change," she said. The same structural unit appears in every sequence where the pressure differential increases, which is when it's most engaged, and that unit maps, as far as I can tell, to the concept of state transition, moving from one form to another. It wants to know how you decide to change. The musician's name was Beatrice. She was 73 years old and had come to Marin's Reach because her daughter was a marine geologist on Platform 7, and Beatrice had decided, at 68, that the remaining years of her life were worth spending near the people she loved, even if near the people she loved meant the bottom of an alien ocean. She had a quality that I have rarely encountered, the ability to sit with ambiguous sound for very long periods without needing to resolve it. Most people, when they listen to something they don't understand, start to impose pattern, start to hear what they expect to hear or what they fear. Beatrice just listened. She let the sound be what it was until the sound told her what it was. She was the first person who told me. The Cecil was not threatening us during those exchanges. Listen to the amplitude envelope, she said, playing me a segment from the third exchange. When something is under pressure, biological pressure, the fight or flight kind, the amplitude spikes, irregular peaks. You can hear it in anything. A person under stress, their voice gets these micro peaks you don't hear in calm speech. Animals before a strike, same thing. She played the segment. The waveform on the screen was smooth, rolling hills, not jagged peaks. This is not a creature preparing for attack. This is a creature in conversation, extremely engaged. See how dense the lower frequency range is. But not hostile. Something is very interested in what we're saying. What are we saying? I asked. She gave me a look that was more patient than I deserved. What you're saying from its perspective is something like, we are not a finished thing. We are in process. We change according to conditions, but we change by choice, not by external force. She paused. That's genuinely novel for something that has only ever encountered change as something that happened to organisms over geological time, or as something imposed on organisms by its own incorporation process. Something that changes itself on purpose on a human timescale, that's not in its model. Is that good or bad? It's interesting, she said. And for something as old and stable as this network, interesting might be the rarest possible category. I thought about that for a long time. About carcinization. About the Cecil's ancient drive to incorporate, to remodel, to bring everything it encountered into alignment with its preferred shape. About how something that had spent millennia being the only apex presence in this ocean might understand change, as something that happened to things, as something imposed by pressure and time, as something that evolution did to organisms that couldn't resist it. About how what they were encountering in us was something different, organisms that changed on purpose, that chose the shape they became, that looked at the pressure bearing down on them and decided deliberately what they were going to turn into. I went back to the hull. I put the modulator against it. I thought about Liz choosing to stay in that tunnel and measure the thing that had her instead of fight it. About Mari filing that transfer request and then not leaving, not because she couldn't, but because the situation required her to be something different from what she'd planned. About Gail going up the shaft alone to restore comms while the floor moved. About the woman who left her wedding ring and kept the drawing of a fish. About Marin Solis, who spent 8 years getting somewhere and died before she arrived and gave her name to the ocean anyway. I put all of that into the modulator. I know that sounds imprecise. It is imprecise. I do not know exactly what the pressure differentials I generated communicated to the Cecil network. I know what I was trying to say, which was, we change because we choose to, not because pressure makes us, because we decide, because we look at what the situation requires and we make ourselves into the thing that can meet it, even when that costs us something we thought we needed to keep. We become what we need to be, and we do it on our own terms. The network's response came 8 hours later, a sustained low-frequency emission across the entire mapped extent of the Cecil mass, detected by every sensor array on every platform in range. The biologist called me at 200. Her voice, when she said my name, had the quality of someone who has not yet processed what they're looking at. It's pulling back, she said, everywhere, all fronts, uniform retraction, she paused. I could hear her instruments in the background. It's making room. Not retreating, not defeated, making room. The distinction matters. The Cecil network did not collapse or disperse. It consolidated, and in consolidating it left clear substrate, clean rock, unplatted, unincorporated, open, in the areas closest to our platforms. Not a withdrawal born of loss, a withdrawal born of decision. Something that had been trying to understand us had looked at what we sent back and concluded, in whatever way a network of ancient colonial organisms concludes things, that we were worth leaving space for. Worth considering. The following months were the strangest of my life, and my life by that point had not been sparse in strange months. The acoustic dialogue continued. The linguist team developed working interpretations of perhaps 30 distinct Cecil structural units, not words exactly, more like concepts, orientations, ways of framing inquiry. The Cecil had a concept for substrate, and one for network, and one for time across generations that had no human analog, but that the philosopher compared, imperfectly, to the idea of inherited memory. They had a concept that appeared frequently in their emissions toward us that took the team 2 months to interpret, and that turned out to mean, as best we could determine, not yet crab. Something in the process of becoming, something that hasn't settled into its final shape. The Cecil's designation for themselves was the concept for their final form, the wide, flat, armored, optimized shape they had been for so long that the shape was the identity. For us, for humans, they used, not yet crab. The linguist thought it was derogatory. The philosopher thought it was descriptive. The musician thought it was the closest thing to a compliment the Cecil had available, that not yet meant still changing, and to a species that had found its final shape and stopped, still changing might be the most remarkable thing imaginable. I think she was right. I think that's what Liz understood in that tunnel in those 2 minutes in the structure of the sound the thing holding her arm was making. I think she heard it say, "You are not a finished thing." And she thought, correct. And she did the math. And she gave us the time. We never fully reclaimed Platform 9. The Cecil network beneath it remained, incorporated into the rock, part of the seamount's permanent structure now. But it did not expand. The border of its territory stabilized. The platforms it had not reached it did not reach. The colonists it had taken, the ones from Platform 3 from 9, were not returned, because what had been done to them was done, and there was no undoing it. And some of what we eventually understood about the Cecil convinced us that what they considered to have been done was not what we considered to have been done. And that gap in comprehension was one we chose to live with rather than resolve by violence, because resolving it by violence would have cost us the only thing we'd actually won: the acknowledgement that we were worth negotiating with. Platform 9 seamount was eventually designated a contact zone, restricted access, acoustic monitoring continuous, no construction, no mining, no sensor deployment beyond what the dialogue required. The Cecil network remained there, and we remained in our platforms, and between us there was something that historians, when they eventually write about this, will probably call a treaty, though nobody signed anything and the terms were never stated explicitly. The terms were understood. They were, you exist and we exist and you are not yet crab, and we are what we are and there is room enough in this ocean for both. I walk sideways because of the pressure, yes. Because of what it did to my knee, the long months of deep work, the dive suit that fit wrong at the hip and I kept meaning to get adjusted and never did. That's true. But also I walk sideways because something in me changed down there in the rock in the dark, listening to something ancient ask what I was. Something in how I move through the world. Not wide and flat and armored, I'm not built for that and I wasn't made for it. But lower, more deliberate. More aware of the things I'm moving through rather than the destination I'm moving toward. Gale got his senior certification. He's a lead engineer now on Platform 4, mentoring people who remind him of who he used to be. Mari got her transfer eventually, not to the agricultural platforms, those were too close to the expanding contact zone, but to a new research station on the Nightside Terminator where the deep cold was clean and the worst that happened was a pump failure. She sent me a message on the first anniversary of the dialogue which said, Liz was right. It was worth it, that was all. I stayed on Platform 11. Someone had to. Someone who knew the sound of the thing in the rock, who knew which pressure differentials meant inquiry and which meant something like satisfaction. A deep, rolling emission the musician called a chord of completion, a sound the network made when the dialogue had yielded something it was looking for. I learned to make that sound back. It took practice. I was not a musician. Liz would have been better at it. Beatrice helped me for a while. She would sit with me in the maintenance corridor and coach my pressure modulations, telling me when the frequency was right, when the envelope was wrong, when what I was generating was too precise and too mechanical, and needed the irregular human quality that the Cecil had apparently come to expect from our transmissions. She said once that the Cecil could tell the difference between a signal a human was generating from rote repetition, and a signal a human was generating from genuine thought. Whether that was true or whether she was projecting the musicality she'd spent her life studying onto something alien, I can't say with certainty. But the transmissions I generated when I was thinking, really thinking, putting actual intention behind the pressure, produced better responses from the network than the ones I ran on rote. The data was consistent. I stopped questioning the mechanism and accepted the outcome. Beatrice eventually went back to Platform 7 when the network's stability was confirmed enough to reopen transit. Her daughter had kept the platform running through the whole period and had never once asked to leave. Like mother, like daughter, some people are built for wherever they are. But Liz gave us 2 minutes, and I have been using them ever since. The ocean is deep and it is dark, and it is full of things that have been here longer than we have, that have shaped themselves by pressures we are only beginning to understand. There is something in the rock below me, right now, as I write this, that is older than civilization and has faced 100 things before us and incorporated them all into its preferred shape. It looked at us, and instead of incorporating us, it asked a question. We answered. That's the thing about not yet, Crab. You haven't finished becoming. The shape is still open. And that openness, that refusal to be fixed, that willingness to be one thing today and a different thing tomorrow, to be changed by what you encounter without losing the core of what you are, that is the most alien thing about us. That is what the Cecil couldn't model. That is what bought us our room in this ocean. Not our weapons, not our numbers, not our technology or our courage, though we had all of those and used all of them. Our willingness to still be in the process of becoming. I walk sideways. My knee aches when the pressure changes, which in a deep ocean platform is frequently. The coffee from the galley dispenser is still bad, and I drink it anyway because it is familiar, and familiar things have value when you are 2,000 kilometers from anything you would have called home before home became a seamount under an alien ocean. And sometimes, in the maintenance corridor on Platform 11's lower level, I put my hand against the hull and I feel the vibration from below. Low, complex, multi-frequency. Not a threat, not a warning. A question. I answer it.